Welcome to our Devos this week, where we have been tackling that difficult subject of breaking bad habits. We all have them at one point or another. We have to figure out how to change them and modify them. And so today, as we look at one of the things that we want to examine about our bad habits, we have to ask ourselves the question: when we are about to do or participate in a behavior that is not one that we want to participate in, we must ask ourselves the question, what triggers us? What triggers you? Like, what causes you to engage in that bad habit? There's something that happens right before. James Clear, the writer of probably, in my opinion, the second best nonfiction book ever written. The first being, the first obviously being the Bible. You would expect me to say that, but I'm talking about nonfiction books written by people. I like Finish, number 1 by John Acuff. Number 2 is a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. The book is so, almost every page on the book you would want to highlight. It's so helpful from end to end. The studies, the research, all of it is just over the top phenomenal. And he talks about the habit loop. And the habit loop involves what happens in your mind psychologically that constitutes the development of a habit. And the first thing is the mention of a trigger. That is something that causes you to participate in the habit. Something triggers off that bad habit with you. And I'll give you some triggers. It could be, if you remember, and we kind of broke this habit when we first started with our family. But my wife and I, what we used to do is when we both got home from work before we had children, we called them, this is horrible, but we called them fat trays. They're not fat trays, they're called snack trays, but we called them fat trays because I made the joke that these are the trays that we use to put out, and then we sit in front of the TV and eat a meal, and it causes us to get fatter, okay? So we lovingly call them fat trays. We're not calling each other fat. We're not shaming each other. It's what we call the trays, okay? Don't judge me. I'm telling you, I'm giving you a glimpse into my life, okay? So just deal with it, all right? So, when we had kids, needless to say, we never use those anymore because, number one, we want to not have the tray be thrown onto the ground by a toddler who is playing with it. And number 2, we genuinely try to sit down at the table and eat a meal and not sit in front of the TV and eat a meal. We don't like doing that. When we were dating and when we were married, it was fun to sit down and watch a movie or watch a show. But when we, have a family, we try to have family time at the table as best we can, okay? It's not always perfect. But my point is this. The trigger was come home from work and turn the TV on. When that TV goes on, whoop, out comes the fat tray. And we would sit there and we would, eat our food in front of the TV and we would talk about whatever show we were watching at the time. Okay, so that was a trigger, just coming home and sitting down. We knew it was time for dinner because we would always eat dinner together. So my question to you is, what is your trigger for a bad habit? What is your trigger that you do right before, the thing you do right before you engage in that bad habit? What desire do you have right before? What goes on? Some of you, when you're stressed, that's when you engage in your worst behavior. You're like, okay, every time I'm stressed, I need to take a drink. Okay, I got to have a beer. I got to go get wine or whatever, which is not a good coping mechanism. It's not a good habit. Some of you, when you're stressed, you're like, I have to have something sweet. I need sugar. I need that rush. I need that carbohydrate load to get me to, feel like I'm above the stress, to help me get the energy, whatever it is. Figure out what that trigger is, and then try to understand what your desire is linked to that trigger and identify it. James chapter 1, verses 14 through 15. Now again, remember, he's talking here about sin, but not all bad habits are sinful, okay? So if you are, prone to liking sweet things, it's not sinful that you like a sweet thing. But where it becomes a sin is when it's consuming you, it's controlling you, it's drawing you. But you have to know what your trigger is first. So James says in verse 14 of chapter 1 here, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Trigger. Then the desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Again, I'm not implying that my fat trays will bring about death, but I am saying that if I have a bad habit and it's causing negative impacts on my health, it's turned into a sin. It's causing me to have struggles, and therefore it started with that trigger and that natural desire. So what about you? What triggers you? What causes you to participate in the bad habit? If you know it, write it down, because then you'll be able to identify it and say, okay, I have to come up with something else to put in place of that bad habit.